The hot air balloon rose steadily into the crystalline morning sky above Denver, carrying with it not just 2 passengers, but the weight of a question that would change everything. Emma clutched the edge of the wicker basket, her knuckles white against the aged wood, her breath catching in her throat as the city below transformed into a miniature world of toy buildings and ribbon roads. The Rocky Mountains stretched endlessly in the distance, their snow-capped peaks piercing the horizon like ancient sentinels. She had no idea that in mere minutes, this perfect moment would transform into a nightmare that would test the very limits of human courage and love. What began as a romantic proposal 50 feet above the earth would soon become a fight for survival that neither Emma nor Daniel could have imagined. The morning that started with champagne and roses would end in a way that no one could predict, a moment of such raw terror and breathtaking heroism that it would be whispered about for years to come in the small circles of Denver's balloon enthusiasts. But the ending? The ending would prove that sometimes the most terrifying moments give birth to the most beautiful lives. If you want to witness one of the most heart-stopping proposals ever told and discover how a torn balloon led to a miracle, you need to stay until the very end. The YouTube algorithm rewards our most dedicated viewers. Subscribe right now and write in the comments what city you're watching from. Trust me, if you don't subscribe and engage, you might miss the incredible conclusion to this story, and that would be a tragedy because what happens next will leave you speechless. This tale of love, terror, and unimaginable courage deserves your full attention. Daniel Matthews had been planning this moment for 6 months. Every detail had been meticulously arranged: the sunrise flight, the champagne chilling in the basket, the vintage diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother tucked safely in his jacket pocket. He was a successful architect, 34 years old, with a portfolio of award-winning buildings across Colorado. But none of his professional accomplishments had ever made his hands shake the way they did now. Emma Richardson, 29, a pediatric nurse with eyes the color of autumn leaves and a laugh that could light up the darkest room, stood beside him completely unaware that her life was about to change in ways both wonderful and terrifying. "It's so beautiful up here," Emma breathed, her face radiant in the golden morning light. Her auburn hair whipped around her face in the gentle wind, and Daniel thought he had never seen anything more perfect. The pilot, an experienced balloonist named Carl Jenkins who had been flying for 30 years, smiled knowingly from his position at the burner controls. He had done dozens of proposal flights and could always spot that nervous energy in the man who was about to ask the most important question of his life. Daniel reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the small velvet box. "Emma, there's something I need to—" The sound that interrupted him was like nothing he had ever heard before. A sharp, violent ripping that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the peaceful morning. The balloon's envelope, that massive sphere of colorful nylon that kept them aloft, had caught on something during their ascent that none of them had noticed. A metal strut from a nearby radio tower, perhaps, or a sharp branch from an unexpected updraft over the tree line. Whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic. A jagged tear, 6 feet long and growing, opened across the side of the balloon like a wound. Carl's face went from relaxed to terror-stricken in an instant. "Hold on," he shouted, but it was already too late. The basket lurched violently downward as the hot air began pouring out through the tear. Emma screamed, her hands gripping the edge of the basket so hard that her fingernails drew blood from her palms. They were at 700 feet, and they were falling. Daniel's mind went into a mode he had never experienced before. Crystal clear, unnaturally calm, as if time itself had slowed down to allow him to process every detail. He looked at Emma's terrified face, at Carl frantically working the burner trying to compensate for the air loss, at the ground rushing up toward them with sickening speed. They had maybe 45 seconds before impact, maybe less. The basket was spinning. Now, the torn balloon above them, deflating rapidly, no longer a beautiful sphere but a collapsing nightmare of fabric and rope. Emma was sobbing, her whole body shaking, And in that moment, Daniel knew with absolute certainty what he had to do. He had always loved her. From the first moment he had seen her in the hospital waiting room 2 years ago when his nephew had been admitted with pneumonia. She had held the little boy's hand and sung to him softly, and Daniel had known then that she was different, special, irreplaceable. "Emma, listen to me." Daniel grabbed her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "You have to trust me, completely. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. Carl was shouting something about brace positions and impact preparation, but Daniel wasn't listening. He had noticed something. The basket wasn't falling straight down. The remaining hot air in the partially deflated balloon was creating a parachute effect, slowing their descent but not stopping it. They were drifting toward a stand of pine trees near the edge of a suburban neighborhood. Trees meant branches. Branches meant a chance. "Carl, steer us toward those trees," Daniel commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. "Are you insane? We'll be torn apart. We're going to hit anyway. At least the trees will break our fall." Daniel was already pulling off his jacket, then his belt. Emma watched in confusion and horror as he began knotting them together with the emergency rope from the basket's supply kit. They were at 300 feet. 250. The trees were coming up fast, their branches reaching toward the falling basket like wooden fingers. Daniel worked with impossible speed, his architect's hands steady and sure even as death approached. He tied one end of his makeshift rope around Emma's waist, pulling the knots tight enough to hurt. "Daniel, what are you—" "When we hit the trees, the basket is going to flip, maybe break apart. I need you to stay tied to something solid." He secured the other end to the basket's main support beam, the heavy metal frame that held everything together. Then he did the same for Carl, using the pilot's own safety equipment, 150 feet. The details of individual branches became visible. Daniel could see a bird's nest, could smell the pine scent rising from below. Emma was praying in Spanish, words from her childhood tumbling out between sobs. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, his body between hers and the side of the basket that would hit first. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I was going to ask you to marry me today. I had this whole speech planned. But if this is the end, I need you to know. You made my life worth living." 75 feet. Carl had stopped working the burner. There was nothing more to be done. The pilot was crying now, probably thinking of his grandchildren, his wife of 40 years, all the flights he would never take. 50 feet. Emma lifted her face from Daniel's chest, looked into his eyes with a clarity that surprised him. "Yes," she said. "My answer is yes. I would have married you, Daniel Matthews, in any lifetime, in any world." And then they hit. The first impact was with the upper branches, a violent jarring that threw them all against the side of the basket. The wicker screamed in protest, wooden pieces splintering off and falling away into the green below. The balloon's envelope, now completely deflated, tangled in the branches above them, creating a canopy of twisted fabric and rope. The basket tipped, 90 degrees, then 135, until they were hanging nearly upside down. Daniel's rope system worked, barely. Emma and Carl remained secured to the basket's frame, dangling in midair, but Daniel, who had used all his materials on them, had nothing to hold him. His hands gripped the basket edge, every muscle in his arms and shoulders screaming. With the effort of keeping himself from falling the final 30 feet to the ground below. "Daniel!" Emma shrieked, her voice raw with terror. She was hanging from her rope harness, spinning slowly, her eyes locked on his whitening knuckles. "Don't! Move!" Daniel gasped out. Every word cost him precious energy. His hands were slipping. The basket, caught in the branches, was creaking ominously, settling deeper into the tree with each passing second. If he fell, it was 30 feet to hard. Ground, survivable maybe, but the angle was wrong. There were rocks below. He could see them clearly, gray and unforgiving. Carl was screaming for help, his voice carrying across the suburban neighborhood. Doors were opening, people were running, but they were too far away. Daniel could feel his grip weakening. His right hand slipped an inch, then another. Emma was sobbing his name over and over, a prayer and a curse all at once. And then, through the fog of exhaustion and fear, Daniel saw it. A thick branch, maybe 6 inches in diameter, extending from the main trunk just below the basket. If he could swing himself toward it, if he could get his legs around it, he might be able to hold on long enough for help to arrive. It was a crazy idea. Suicidal, probably. To deliberately let go with one hand meant trusting everything to the other, meant swinging himself out over that 30-foot drop with nothing but his own desperate strength. But his grip was failing anyway. This way, at least. He was choosing his fate instead of letting gravity choose for him. "Emma," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Close your eyes." "No, Daniel, don't you dare." "Close your eyes, my love. Trust me one more time." And he swung. His right hand released the basket edge. For one infinite moment, he was held aloft by his left hand alone, his body arcing out over the void. Emma's scream seemed to come from very far away. His right hand reached, grasped, found the branch. His left hand let go of the basket. For a fraction of a second he was in free fall, and then both hands were gripping the branch, and his momentum was swinging his legs up, around, catching the wood in the crook of his knees. He hung there, wrapped around the branch like a child on playground equipment, every muscle trembling with exertion and relief. Above him, Emma was sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Carl was laughing hysterically, the sound of a man who had looked death in the face and found himself somehow still alive. The fire department arrived 12 minutes later. By then, a crowd of at least 50 people had gathered below, holding blankets, calling up encouragement, a neighborhood united by the spectacle of the torn balloon hanging in the tree like a broken promise. The firefighters brought a ladder truck, raised it carefully to the basket, and cut Emma and Carl free one at a time, lowering them to safety in harnesses, while the crowd applauded. Daniel was last. When the firefighter reached him, secured him in the safety harness, he was barely conscious. His hands had locked around the branch in a death grip that took 2 firefighters to pry loose. They lowered him to the ground where Emma was waiting, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her whole body shaking. She threw herself into his arms the moment his feet touched earth, and they collapsed together onto the grass, holding each other with a desperation that made the watching crowd fall silent. There were no words big enough for what had just happened. No language adequate to describe the moment when love meets death and refuses to blink. Later, in the hospital where they were all taken for observation, bruised, battered, but miraculously alive, Daniel would finally complete his interrupted proposal. He was in bed with a bandaged shoulder, 3 cracked ribs, and hands wrapped in gauze from rope burn and wood splinters. Emma sat beside him, her ankles sprained, her arms covered in bruises from the harness. "I lost the ring," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. "It fell out of my pocket when we hit the trees. I had this whole speech prepared. It was supposed to be perfect." Emma laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria. "Daniel, you tied me to a falling basket with your belt and your jacket. You swung through the air like some kind of insane action hero. You saved my life. You saved Carl's life. Perfect doesn't even begin to cover it." "I just need to know," he said, taking her bruised hand in his, bandaged one. "When you said yes up there, when you said you'd marry me, did you mean it? Or was it just the terror talking?" Emma leaned forward, kissed him gently, her tears falling onto his face. "I meant every word. I would marry you right now in this hospital room wearing this horrible gown. I would marry you anywhere, anytime, anyway. You showed me today what love really means. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, but being willing to risk everything for the person who matters most." They were married 6 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at Denver Botanic Gardens. Carl was there, walking Emma down the aisle because her own father had passed away years ago, and the pilot had become like family. The story of the torn balloon had made local news, then regional, then somehow gone viral. They were invited on talk shows, asked to write their story for magazines, but they declined it all. Some moments were too sacred to turn into entertainment. Emma became pregnant on their honeymoon. Then again, 2 years later, and again, 18 months after that. 3 children, 3 miracles, each one named for something from that terrible, wonderful morning. Jackson, for Carl's middle name. Sierra, for the mountains they had seen. Hope, because that's what had kept them alive when everything seemed lost. 1 year after the balloon incident, on the anniversary of the day they almost died, Daniel bought another hot air balloon ride. Emma thought he was insane, but she went anyway because she trusted him, because she had learned that sometimes the things that terrify us most are the things we need to face. They rose into the same crystalline morning sky, this time with a different pilot, a different balloon company, but the same mountains watching over them. Emma's hands were white-knuckled on the basket edge again, her breath coming too fast, but Daniel held her and pointed out the beauty, the city waking up below them, the sun turning the snow peaks gold, the endless possibility of the sky. "You did it," he said softly. "You came back up here." "We did it," she corrected. "I wouldn't be here without you. I wouldn't be anywhere without you." And high above Denver, where they had once fallen from the sky in terror, they rose together in joy. Now, 5 years later, Daniel stands in the backyard of their home in the Denver suburbs, watching his 3 children play on the swing set he built with his own hands. Jackson, 4 years old, pushes his younger sisters with surprising gentleness for a boy his age. Sierra, 2, shrieks with delight as she goes higher. Hope, just 6 months old, sleeps peacefully in the bassinet beside him, her tiny fists curled against her chest. Emma steps out onto the back deck with 2 cups of coffee, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing his old college sweatshirt and paint-stained jeans. She's never been more beautiful. She hands him his cup and leans against his side, fitting perfectly into the curve of his body the way she always has. "Do you ever think about it?" she asks quietly, both of them knowing exactly what "it" means. "Every day," Daniel admits. "Every single day, I think about how close I came to losing you, to losing all of this. And every day I'm grateful for the terror that taught me what I was capable of, for the fall that showed me what really matters, for the moment I chose to let go of that basket and trust that I was strong enough to catch something better." Emma turns to look up at him, her autumn leaf eyes bright with unshed tears. "We were so lucky." "No," Daniel says, kissing the top of her head. "We were so loved, by each other, by Carl who fought to keep us alive, by every person who ran to help us that morning, by whatever force in the universe decided we deserved a second chance. That's not luck, Emma. That's grace." Jackson calls for them to watch him do a flip off the swing. Sierra demands to be pushed higher. Hope begins to stir, making the small, mewling sounds. That means she'll be hungry soon. And Emma and Daniel move together down the deck stairs, moving toward their children, toward their life, toward the beautiful, ordinary miracle of another day together. The balloon from that morning, or what remained of it, hangs in their garage, carefully preserved. Sometimes Daniel goes out there late at night when he can't sleep, and he runs his hands over the torn fabric, traces the jagged edge that nearly killed them. It reminds him that nothing is guaranteed, that every moment is borrowed, that love isn't about perfect proposals or flawless plans. It's about being willing to let go of the safe thing and reach for the branch, even when you can't be sure it will hold. Emma finds him there sometimes, standing in the dark garage with his hands on the balloon, And she doesn't ask what he's thinking. She just takes his hand and leads him back inside, back to their children, back to the warm house that smells like cinnamon and coffee and the indefinable scent of home. Back to the life they built from the ashes of that terrible, beautiful morning when they fell from the sky and learned that sometimes the most broken things create the strongest foundations. And if you look closely at the ring Daniel finally bought Emma, a simple band of platinum and diamonds, nothing like the vintage heirloom he lost in the fall, you'll see an inscription on the inside. Just 2 words, engraved in letters so small you have to squint to read them. We flew. This story of terror and courage, of a torn balloon and a desperate gamble that paid off, reminds us that the most powerful love is forged in the moments when we refuse to let go, even when letting go seems like the only option. If this tale of Daniel and Emma's extraordinary journey moved you, click subscribe and let us know in the comments how you would rate this story from 0 to 10. Their love started 50 feet above Denver and survived a fall that should have killed them. Now they have 3 beautiful children and a life built on the foundation of that impossible choice to reach for the branch instead of accepting the fall.